Trump could withdraw U.S. troops from Baltics and leave Europe vulnerable to Russia, European officials fear, as report claims peace plan would see Ukraine forced into extraordinary financial reparations. European officials believe U.S. President Donald Trump is likely to withdraw troops from the Baltics, leaving the continent vulnerable to Russia, as a report claims his peace plan would see Ukraine forced into paying extraordinary financial reparations. The Telegraph reported that the U.S. is seeking to control Ukraine's critical minerals, travel ports, and natural resources in exchange for protection from Russia. According to a draft of the contract, marked as privileged and confidential, and dated February 7, 2025, seen by the newspaper, the agreement covers the economic value associated with resources of Ukraine, including mineral resources, oil and gas resources, ports, other infrastructure, as agreed. This would see the U.S. take 50% of revenues received by Ukraine from the extraction of natural resources, and 50% of the financial value of all new licenses issued to third parties for the future monetization of these resources. According to one source close to the negotiations who spoke to the Telegraph, the U.S. has included a clause that means pay us first, then feed your children. The U.S. has given a total of $175 billion to Ukraine across 5 appropriation bills passed by Congress, which Trump has long said he wants back. Volodymyr Zelensky has previously proposed giving the U.S. a direct stake in Ukraine's rare earth elements, in an attempt to smooth the way for continued arms deliveries, claiming in September that American operations would make it far less likely for Russia to attack again. But the FT reported that European officials believe that Trump is willing to agree to taking American troops out of the Baltic states, which all border Russia or its ally Belarus. This would make Europe vulnerable to a potential Russian invasion. Aside from the military risk, Trump's reported deal would place Ukraine at the mercy of the American president, who has long held sympathies for Russian President Vladimir Putin. The deal would also see the U.S. getting a right of first refusal for the purchase of exportable minerals for all future licenses. The U.S. would also have the exclusive right to establish the method, selection criteria, terms, and conditions of all future licenses and projects. Trump previously said that Ukraine had essentially agreed to hand over $500 billion in assets, telling Fox News, "They have tremendously valuable land in terms of rare earths, in terms of oil and gas, in terms of other things." He also threatened that Ukraine would be left to fend for itself if it rejected the terms of the deal. "They may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday or they may not be Russian someday. But I want this money back." Ukraine has not yet responded to the reports. But Zelensky, who has long refused to give up any of the territory annexed by Russia as part of a peace deal, said this weekend that he believes Trump has no plan to end the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian president went on to say that his nation is ready and willing to negotiate, provided the U.S. and Kyiv can come to a unified understanding of the situation. "We are ready for any conversations with America and our allies. If they provide us with specific answers to specific requests from us and a common understanding of the dangerous Putin, then with our unified understanding we will be ready to talk with the Russians," he said. U.S. Defense Secretary Hegseth openly declared last week at a meeting in Brussels that the prospect of Ukraine regaining its pre-2014 borders as part of a peace deal was unrealistic. "We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective," Hegseth told the meeting of Ukrainian officials and more than 40 allies. "Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering," he added. Unsurprisingly, this notion was not well received by European politicians, most of whom have spent the past 36 months supporting Ukraine's war effort. The feeling was perhaps summed up best by former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt, who sarcastically remarked on Hegseth's speech, "It's certainly an innovative approach to a negotiation, to make very major concessions even before they have started." In a policy paper published by the conservative American think tank America First, Special Envoy Kellogg lambasted the Biden administration's approach to the Ukraine conflict and criticized those who believe Ukraine could eventually repel Russian troops from its borders with endless military aid supplied by the West. The Biden administration's approach to negotiations has been devoid of strategy and presidential leadership, the paper read. Biden and his team have consistently opposed any ceasefire or peace agreement that does not include a complete Russian withdrawal from all Ukrainian territory. The trouble with these arguments is that it is too late to avoid the possible consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sending weapons to an endless stalemate for these reasons is expensive virtue signaling and not a constructive policy to promote peace and global stability, he concluded. It's not clear exactly how much of its territory Ukraine would be expected to renounce under a Trump-negotiated peace plan, but Russia currently controls almost a fifth of Ukrainian soil. Russia has also stated that Ukraine would have to relinquish control of a small amount of Russian territory its forces managed to seize in Kursk as part of a counteroffensive last year, as part of any peace deal. Should the U.S. force Ukraine to give up some or all of the territory annexed by Putin's troops, the next challenge is to ensure that Russia does not simply take up arms again and push for more territory months or years down the line. For Ukraine, the answer to that question was, until recently, very obvious: NATO membership. The transatlantic security bloc's famous Article 5, the cornerstone of its founding treaty in 1949, stipulates that an armed attack against one or more of its members shall be considered an attack against them all. Several European leaders, including British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, have said as recently as last week that Ukraine is still on an irreversible path to joining NATO. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement, Hegseth told Ukrainian delegates and European defense chiefs last week. He later gave a half-hearted caveat, adding that in regard to the likelihood of Ukraine's future NATO membership, everything is on the table. But NATO operates on a unanimous voting system, meaning that the US can bar Ukraine from joining the bloc even if the other 31 member nations are in favor. Hegseth also rounded on America's European partners in NATO, declaring the White House would no longer tolerate an imbalanced relationship that encourages dependency. As the US pulls back from its relationship with Ukraine, European leaders may have to step in to provide support. Britain and France are said to be discussing the possibility of deploying a peacekeeping force to Ukraine to patrol the contact line should the conflict be frozen in place as part of a ceasefire deal. Sir Keir Starmer has already said the UK is ready to play a leading role in Ukraine's defense and security, including the commitment of £3 billion a year until 2030. It also means being ready and willing to contribute to security guarantees to Ukraine by putting our own troops on the ground if necessary, he confirmed in an article published by The Telegraph. I feel very deeply the responsibility that comes with potentially putting British servicemen and women in harm's way. But any role in helping to guarantee security is helping to guarantee the security of our continent and the security of this country. A spokesperson for the German Defense Ministry also said this morning that Berlin would contribute to a framework that sees European troops head for Ukraine. If the framework is given, Germany will not shy away, the spokesperson told a press conference, responding to a question about the possibility of German ground troops in Ukraine. But not everyone is on the same page. This morning, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said his nation would continue to support Ukraine with aid, but would not deploy troops. Despite some having shown willingness to put boots on the ground to uphold an eventual ceasefire in Ukraine, European leaders still insist that America is the only nation capable of guaranteeing Kiev's long-term security. The White House has seemingly acknowledged this, as Reuters reported this weekend that U.S. diplomats had sent a document asking European governments what they would need from Washington to be able to ensure that a Europe-led military force could secure Ukraine from further aggression.